Welcome back to the Burundi to Gombe podcast and part 2 of A Conservation Corridor. I am your host, Dr. Paul Harvey, and it is a huge pleasure to have you join. Episode 6.
Currently, I'm working as a director of the Gombe Stream Research Centre.
That was Dr. Deus Mjungu. Deus lives and works in Tanzania, the southern end of the planned wildlife corridor, stretching from Burundi to Gombe. As Deus explains, Gombe is one of the longest-running wild animal studies in the world, and of course is the origin of Dr. Jane Goodall's incredible work that has shaped and changed the world.
This is one of the longest running field research in the world. So we have been conducting chimpanzee researches for over 60 years since Dr. Jane Goodall established this research back in 1960. It has been ongoing since then. So my main role now as a director is basically to make sure that I'm coordinating all the research activities. We are working with various maybe collaborators from different parts of the world. So we are working with people from US, some from Australia, of course, and of course also local researchers from within the country. So my main role is to make sure that I'm collaborating all these different type of researches which are happening on the ground. But also, as an administrator, I'm making sure that while we are doing our research, we are also complying with all the, I would say, maybe policies and labor laws which are guiding our work in the country.
Deus completed his PhD at the University of Minnesota, studying chimpanzee behavioral ecology. More specifically, how groups or communities of chimpanzees interact and compete for resources like food and territory. His research was fundamental in demonstrating that chimpanzees, much like humans, can engage in acts of warfare. And in fact, his research studying two groups of chimpanzees documented a battle between those groups. Contrary to the expectation that the larger group would take the territory of the smaller group, it was actually, in fact, the smaller group that won out over the larger group to dominate that territory. Now having a less active involvement in research, Deus oversees research activities as the director of Gombe Stream Research Centre.
My background is in zoology and wildlife ecology. And I should say that I grew up near famous Serengeti National Park. So when I was growing up, I was seeing these wild animals and I got passion to wild animals. That's why I went to do my first degree in zoology and wildlife ecology. And after my first degree, I got a job to work with Jane Goodall. So that is the first time when I came across Jane Goodall, and I was lucky that my first wild animals which I started working with was chimpanzees, because ever since I've fallen in love with them, and they are so amazing creatures. As you might be aware, they're in so many ways like us. So I'm really happy that I was able to get in touch with the Jane Goodall Institute and to start working with the chimpanzees. My main role is to make sure that this long-term research, which was started by Dr. Jane Goodall, is keep on going. So every day, we are making sure that we are following a target individual, recording all the important behaviors of where this individual is or her, and recording all the association in a group. So that is like one of the key thing which we are doing. But apart from that, we are also studying mother and infants. So we know that chimpanzee mothers, they bring their babies in a different way. So we are just trying to understand what does that mean. If you have a very protective mother, what that reflect in your future success. And if you have, like, let's say, easygoing mother, what does that mean? So we are trying to understand these differences of parental or mothering in chimpanzees. But apart from that, also we know disease is like major cause of death is in our chimpanzees. So we have what we call eco health monitoring, just to try to understand all different types of disease and dynamics which are affecting our chimps. So we are recording all the disease. We are collecting fecal samples to try to analyze what is normal, what is not normal, and what should we do when things is not normal. So it's a lot of things which are really happening on the ground.
Hearing about the new work that Deus and his teams are doing in Gombe, I got thinking about how the research tools and techniques have developed over the years, and how these cutting-edge modern techniques are helping to answer some of the most challenging questions of contemporary science.
Well, I would say that the good thing about our research is that we have been able to incorporate new technology. As you know, when Jen started, she just had like a notebook, simple binocular and a pen, and she was documenting all the observations which she was capturing at simple way, but in a very powerful manner. And through that, maybe just those simple tools, you could tell a very big stories which transform the way we think about ourselves and other animals. But over time, I would say that our studies have been able to accept or to incorporate new technologies.
Aside from just the scientific tools and techniques, the actual physical landscape of Gombe must look different today than how it did when Jane Goodall first set foot in Gombe 60 years ago.
The park has its own history. Before 1943, people used to live in the park. And then the park was gazetted as a game reserve, and people were removed. But there were still some activities which were allowed. In 1968, because of those remarkable discoveries of Dr. Deus' work, it was promoted to highest status of national park. And once it's a national park, then it's only conservation which is allowed. Other activities are totally prohibited. So over time, I would say with increasing protection, then and minimizing the frequency of fires, then these other type of vegetations, it's like they were allowed to flourish. I would say that what we see now is that the vegetation inside the park is increasing, and we feel like maybe it's because in early days fires used to be very frequent in the park, so the suppression of the fire maybe also has promoted the increase in the vegetation. But the park is becoming dense with these tangled vines, and in some areas it's even these tangled vines are starting killing the trees. So that is the major change in maybe in vegetation, and thanks to also technology that we are using satellite images to be able to track how the vegetation is or has changed over time. So I would say it has been unchanging. So whether today is more natural than when people used to live is a difficult things to answer.
Throughout this podcast series, we've heard a lot about chimpanzees. This is, after all, a conservation project that is focused around chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are core and fundamental to the conservation project, the Burundi to Gombe Wildlife Corridor. But we haven't really explored why chimpanzees are so significant. Why are they important? And why should we care about chimpanzees? I wanted to hear this from Deus, somebody who has worked very closely with wild chimpanzees throughout his career in an iconic chimpanzee location.
Well, I think there's several reasons of why we should care about chimps, or why should people care about chimps. One, I would say chimpanzees, they have their own rights to live, like other animals. They are very fascinating creatures. So they live in a very complex society. They form these permanent bonds. So I would say that is a one thing. But the main thing, as we know, these are the only living creatures. They are only, I would say, they are only closest living creatures to us, human. So it's the only cousin which we can relate with. And we believe that by continuing protecting them, it's not only that we are protecting these fascinating creatures, but we are also learning a lot about ourselves. So it's the chimps, it's like they are giving us an opening window to understand ourselves. We know they can suffer some of disease we human are suffering, like respiratory disease. So by learning more from them, we can protect ourselves much better. We can know more about disease from them. We can learn more about maybe reproductive system. So that is some of few maybe reasons why we think chimpanzees should be protected. But also, as you know, chimpanzees are like key species that if you protect a chimpanzee, you may be able to protect many other species. They occupy a very large area, and this area sometimes contains important ecological functions to human, like maybe water catchment, and now we are also talking about maybe even carbon trading. So just by protecting chimps, you may be offering a lot of ecological services to humans. So I think that's why we feel like they have some rights to be protected. But the key one, we shouldn't forget that these are the closest human relatives who are surviving. So by having them, we can learn a lot from them.
With that incredible reflection on the importance and significance of chimpanzees, it was time once again to turn to the Burundi to Gombe Wildlife Corridor project, this time hearing about Gombe, the Tanzanian end of the corridor, and about exactly what the corridor is, what that means for conservation, and how that plays out in the social, political, and environmental setting of East Africa.
Gombe Burundi corridor is touching interest of many people because of its uniqueness. As you know, Gombe is a very small national park. Currently, we just have around maybe less than 90 individuals or chimpanzee in the park. So this is a very small number. Luckily, in its vicinity, maybe 10, 15 kilometers, there are still some remnant populations of chimps, which are connecting Gombe and southern Burundi chimpanzees. So we feel like maybe the long-term survival of Gombe will depend on how we really come together to try safeguard this chimpanzee which are between Burundi and Gombe. Because otherwise all the firm or what Gombe has done to humanity will just maybe disappear if we cannot try to protect these chimpanzees nearby Gombe. That's why a lot of people have shown interest to put hands together and trying to make sure that we are preserving the chimpanzee in Gombe Burundi corridor. So this area outside Gombe is owned by the villages. And back in 2007, the Jane Goodall Institute worked with the village and the district government to try to convince the villages to set aside these areas as their village forest reserves. So some of the villages are great, and it has been maybe ongoing process, but now I would say maybe the big part of the area from north of Gombe all the way to Burundi has been set aside as the village forest reserves. So these are owned by the villages, and other maybe partners are trying just to help them to protect. So it's very challenging to protect these village forest reserves because they are very far from the center of the villages. So either side from, so some are owned by the lakeside villages and others are owned by the mainland villages. But walking from either side, it could take you 3 to 4 hours to reach to these forest reserves. So because of its remoteness, you cannot miss bad guys. So people are coming, cutting trees, some are trying to poach for chimps, some are starting settlements, some are farming. So we need to work with the villages to make sure that the good intentions of the villages are safeguarded by helping them to protect these forests.
As we've explored a number of times already in the Burundi to Gombe podcast series, engaging with local communities and stakeholders is often one of the most critical and fundamental, yet challenging aspects of a conservation project. And this has been true in Tanzania also. Listening, hearing, understanding, and then discussing it with local community stakeholders is one of the fundamental aspects of the work that the Jane Goodall Institutes around the world do. And once again, in this instance, engaging with communities has been vital to the work. But it isn't always easy to have those conversations with the community stakeholders. Oftentimes, there's hostility, there's a tension, there's the question of why are chimpanzees important? Why should we care more about chimpanzees than providing food for our own families?
It's not an easy maybe conversation, but you try to let them see the pros and cons of having that area set aside for conservations, because it's a very remote area where it's also used as a water catchment for some of the villages. So you try to show them some public benefits which are going to be accrued from protecting those forests rather than individuals' benefits. It's not an easy conversation, but eventually at the end of the day, you all arrive at the same place, and it's involve like the public awareness, and you let the village governments spearheading all those discussions. So you are not someone in front who is doing this. It's more about the villages trying to preserve their own forests for their own benefits. And in some areas, it's very, very tricky because you don't want to show them that you are protecting because you want to protect the chimps. So chimps is just a consequence of what will happen. You want to make sure that you are minimizing the risk of soil erosion or landslides. You want to make sure that you are safeguarding the water catchment areas, and so eventually, majority of people will understand maybe the intention of setting those forests aside. But it's not a simple conversation, and it takes some time. We started in 2007. It took like maybe even 10 years to achieve the standard which we wanted. We are happy that now we have that stretch of the forest, and now it's more of trying to reinforce the laws to make sure that some people are not taking advantage and trying to undermine all the efforts which have been won over time.
Given the success of their work so far, I was really interested to know what the future holds for Deus and the team at Gombe.
We are working with the village governments because it's more also of the governance issues. It's not making sense. How can some people come and start farms or settlements in your area if you are not really involved? So we are working with the government officials in terms of good governance to make sure that they total adhere to those principles of good governance. The other thing is that we are trying to make sure that we are regularly supporting some, we call it patrols, just making sure that we have a presence of people on areas or sensitive areas where we think maybe chimps are. So if people come and see that there are people on those areas, then they will be discouraged to start some farms or maybe to do some deforestation. So we are putting in some people to do some regular patrols on those areas, but also we keep on monitoring the chimpanzee. We still feel like maybe there could be 10 to 15 chimpanzees still living in that area. So we are working hard to ensure that this number is not continuing going down. Also, we are trying to forge some relationship with our friends in the other side in Burundi and see whether we can work together and see how we can address those challenges of immigration, some people coming from their areas and try to settle in our areas and see how we can minimize those effects.
Did you know that the Jane Goodall Institute has offices around the world? Be a part of a global community helping to protect nature and promote conservation. Visit the Our Global Presence page at janegoodall.org to find out more. Education has been a theme throughout the podcast series, and once again, education is something that Jane Goodall herself holds so dearly. We heard from James Forbes from JGI Australia about just how important education is, and why we must nurture young minds through education. So naturally, I also wanted to find out about the significance of education in Tanzania, at Gombe, and for conservation of wildlife more generally in that region.
Education is a very important tool to the young generation, as we believe that we, the grown-ups have messed up, and we don't want the coming generation to do worse things which we have done to the environments. So we really need to make sure that we are educating them the value of the environments, and of course of the animals who are living on those environments. The good thing about the JGI, we have Roots and Shoots Clubs, which is a youth organization which is trying to address some of the challenges facing our environments and our animals. And we feel like this is very key for future of our planet, to make sure that the young generation really understand the value of these unique features, which to some extent we have compromised. And I believe that we have an opportunity at our hands to make sure that Gombe Burundi corridor is coming like a lab or like classes where communities, not only local communities, but people even from far can come and learn the success story, because it's really becoming a very nice success story in terms of vegetation. It is an area where the habitat had totally been degraded, but now we see the habitat is coming up, and we can see even some chimps now are moving from this area coming to Gombe, so showing that there's already some connection between this area and Gombe, and of course I hope with even Burundi. So it's a good success story which we really needed to cherish and make sure that we protect it for the benefits of future generation, for our young kids.
My time with Deus was almost up, and as I have done many times before, I wanted to know what Deus's hope for the future is. He shared with me a poignant reminder of why anybody is working on this conservation project, the Burundi to Gombe corridor. And it's simply to make sure that future generations have the ability to see wildlife in their natural environment that we are so lucky and blessed to see today. I was confronted by this answer, by the mixed emotions of hope and despair. That this was the thought that came to Deus's mind when asked this question was, to me, profoundly unsettling. I thought to myself, how have we let things get this bad?
My hope for the future, I hope that chimpanzee will still be roaming at Gombe and Gombe Burundi corridor, because I cannot imagine life without chimpanzees in this landscape. And I know it's a huge wishes, but I believe if we keep on working together and believing, then eventually that will be the reality, because I can't imagine my grandkids going to the zoo to see what I've been blessed with. That is my really big wish and hope, that the landscape will still be dominated by the chimps and the habitat will be lovely. And I believe that if we keep on working together and pulling all the effort, this is something which is manageable.
This podcast was produced by me, Dr. Paul Harvey. I want to extend a huge thanks to all of the guests and those people that have worked behind the scenes to make this podcast possible. Please share your feedback, questions or comments to paul@docpjharvey.com. You can find more of my work by visiting www.docpjharvey.com.